The brass doors of the elevator slid open with a whisper, revealing the gleaming interior of the Meridian Tower's executive lift. Jefferson Blake stepped inside, his faded blue maintenance coveralls still damp from fixing a burst pipe on the 32nd floor. At 43, he had learned that the best way to understand his buildings was to work in them, hands-on, at least one day per month. His board of directors thought it was eccentric. His COO called it a waste of time. Jefferson called it staying grounded. He pressed the button for the penthouse, looking forward to a hot shower and the financial reports waiting on his desk. The doors began to close, then jerked open again as a hand shot through the gap. A woman stumbled inside, clutching a portfolio case against her chest like a shield. She was somewhere in her late 20s, with paint-stained jeans, a thrift store blazer that had seen better days, and dark hair pulled into a messy bun. Her brown eyes were red-rimmed, and mascara tracked down her cheeks in faint lines. "Thank God," she muttered, not looking at him as she jabbed the button for the 58th floor. "This day cannot get any worse." Jefferson said nothing, simply nodding politely as the elevator began its ascent. He had learned that most people preferred silence during these brief vertical journeys. But this woman seemed wound-tight, practically vibrating with barely contained emotion. 58 floors, she said to no one in particular, her voice bitter. 58 floors of marble and gold leaf and obscene wealth, just so some billionaire can feel important. She finally glanced at Jefferson, taking in his coveralls and work boots. "No offense to you. I'm sure you work hard to keep this monument to excess running." "None taken," Jefferson replied mildly. "Bad day?" She laughed, a sharp sound without humor. "Bad day? Try bad year. Bad life, maybe." She shifted the portfolio case. "I just got rejected from my 6th gallery this month. Do you know what they told me? That my work is too raw, too emotional, not commercial enough. As if art should be some sterile decoration for rich people's walls." The elevator hummed steadily upward. Jefferson watched the floor numbers climb, careful to keep his expression neutral. "What kind of art do you create?" "Mixed media. Paintings, sculptures, installations. I focus on stories about regular people. The ones who actually make this city run while people like Jefferson Blake sit in their towers counting money." She gestured around the elevator. "This is his building, you know. The Meridian Tower. Named after his first company. The man owns half of San Francisco, and for what? So he can have 3 homes he never uses and a car collection worth more than most people make in 10 lifetimes?" Jefferson felt a familiar tightness in his chest. He had heard variations of this speech before, usually at a distance, filtered through news articles or social media. Hearing it delivered with such venom by someone standing 3 feet away was different. "You know him?" he asked carefully. "Know him? God, no. I just know his type. Self-made billionaire, probably thinks he earned everything through hard work and genius, completely blind to all the advantages he had. The connections, the capital, the fact that he's a man in tech." Ramona wiped at her eyes angrily. "Sorry, I shouldn't dump this on you. You're just trying to get through your workday." "It's all right," Jefferson said. "Sounds like you needed to vent." She looked at him properly for the first time, really seeing him. Her expression softened slightly. "You're nice. Most people in this building walk past maintenance staff like they're invisible. I used to clean offices downtown to pay for art school. I know what that feels like." The elevator passed the 40th floor. Jefferson made a decision, one he might regret but felt compelled to make anyway. "What's your name?" "Ramona. Ramona Pierce." She managed a weak smile. "And you are?" "Jeff," he said, using the nickname only his late father had called him. "So this meeting on 58, it's important?" "It was supposed to be. I had an appointment with Daphne Winters, the director of the Winters Contemporary Gallery. But her assistant just called to cancel while I was in the lobby. Apparently, something more important came up. The bitterness returned to her voice. Story of my life. Always something more important. Jefferson knew Daphne Winters. He had funded her gallery's expansion 3 years ago and sat on the board of its charitable foundation. He made a mental note, then immediately questioned his own impulse. This woman had just spent 5 minutes insulting everything he had built. Why did he want to help her? Maybe because underneath the anger and frustration, he heard something genuine. Pain mixed with passion. The kind of desperate determination he remembered from his own early days, when he had been a 22-year-old dropout pitching software ideas to anyone who would listen. "Can I see?" he asked, nodding toward the portfolio case. Ramona hesitated, then shrugged. "Why not? At least someone will look at them today." She unzipped the case and pulled out a tablet, swiping through images. Jefferson stepped closer, genuinely curious. The first piece stopped him cold. It was a painting of a janitor in an office building at night, surrounded by the ghosts of the people who worked there during the day. The janitor was rendered in vivid, loving detail while the ghosts were translucent sketches. The message was clear: this person, doing invisible work, was more real than the executives who ignored them. "This is remarkable," Jefferson said quietly. Ramona glanced at him, surprised by the sincerity in his voice. "You think so?" "I do." He swiped to the next image. A construction worker eating lunch on a beam high above the city, the buildings below small and insignificant. Then a nurse in a hospital hallway, her face exhausted but determined, while behind her a wall of photos showed all the lives she had touched. Each piece told a story about dignity in ordinary work, about the people who kept society functioning while rarely receiving recognition. The technique was stunning, but it was the empathy in every brushstroke that truly struck him. "These aren't just good," Jefferson said. "They're important." The elevator chimed softly as it reached the 58th floor. The doors opened onto a quiet hallway with cream-colored walls and abstract art that probably cost 6 figures per piece. Ramona put the tablet away, zipping up the case. "Thanks for saying that, Jeff. You didn't have to be kind." She stepped out, then turned back. "And I'm sorry for ranting about your boss. It's not personal. I just get frustrated with how this city works sometimes. How the world works." "I understand," Jefferson said. And he did, more than she knew. "Good luck, Ramona. I hope things turn around for you." "Yeah, well, hope is about all I have left." She gave him a small wave and walked down the hallway, her shoulders sagging under the weight of another rejection. Jefferson rode the elevator up to the penthouse, his mind churning. The doors opened directly into his private office, a space of floor-to-ceiling windows, minimalist furniture, and carefully curated art that suddenly looked sterile to his eyes. His assistant, Gregory Walsh, looked up from his desk in the corner. "Sir, you have the board meeting in 20 minutes. Shall I have your suit brought down?" "Yes, thank you, Gregory." Jefferson walked to the window, looking out over the city Ramona Pierce had accused him of owning. "Also, get me a full profile on an artist named Ramona Pierce. Gallery submissions, exhibitions, everything you can find." Gregory's fingers flew across his keyboard. "Of course, sir. May I ask what this is regarding?" Jefferson thought about the pain in her eyes, the passion in her work, and the anger in her words. He thought about how she had seen his coveralls and treated him like a human being, not an obstacle or an opportunity. "Let's call it research," he said finally. "Sometimes the most valuable insights come from unexpected sources." As Gregory worked, Jefferson caught his own reflection in the window. Somewhere along his journey from struggling entrepreneur to billionaire, he had stopped paying attention to the Ramonas of the world. The people doing crucial work for poverty wages. The artists pouring their souls into creations the market deemed unmarketable. The ones who looked at his empire and saw not innovation and job creation, but inequality and excess. Maybe she was right about some of it. Maybe all of it. The question was, what was he going to do about that? 3 weeks passed before Ramona Pierce thought about the kind maintenance man in the elevator again. She had been too busy with an unexpected surge of opportunities that seemed to materialize out of nowhere. First, the Bayside Community Arts Center called with an offer for a month-long exhibition. Then a collector named Mrs. Patricia Hammond purchased 3 of her pieces for an astonishing sum. Most surprisingly, she received an invitation to showcase her work at the annual San Francisco Art and Innovation Gala, a black-tie fundraiser where tech money met creative talent. Ramona stood in her cramped studio apartment in the Mission District, staring at the embossed invitation with suspicion. Things like this didn't just happen, not to artists who got rejected 6 times in 1 month. But her best friend, Liz Torres, had squealed so loudly when she heard the news that Ramona's neighbor banged on the wall. "This is your break," Liz insisted, helping Ramona into a borrowed black dress that almost fit. "Stop looking for the catch and just enjoy it." "There's always a catch," Ramona muttered, but she let Liz zip her up anyway. The gala was held in the Meridian Towers event space on the 60th floor. Ramona felt her stomach twist as she entered the building, remembering her bitter rant in the elevator. She had been so angry that day, so worn down by rejection that she had lashed out at a stranger who had shown her nothing but kindness. The event space was stunning, all glass walls and ambient lighting that made the city below look like a scattered treasure. Waiters circulated with champagne and tiny, artistic food that probably cost more per bite than Ramona's weekly grocery budget. She accepted a glass, sipping it nervously as she wandered toward the area where her work was displayed. 3 of her paintings hung on temporary walls, spotlit beautifully. A small crowd had gathered, and Ramona felt a flutter of hope. Maybe Liz was right. Maybe this was finally her moment. "The technique is extraordinary," a woman in a silver gown said. "Such empathy for the working class. Very on trend right now." On trend. Ramona swallowed her irritation. Her work wasn't a trend, it was her life, her values, her truth. But she smiled and nodded, playing the part she needed to play. Ramona Pierce? She turned to find a tall man in an impeccably tailored tuxedo standing beside her. He was perhaps mid-40s, with dark hair graying at the temples and sharp blue eyes that seemed familiar somehow. "Yes," she said. "Jefferson Blake." He extended his hand. "I'm so glad you could join us tonight. Your work is the highlight of the evening." Ramona's hand froze halfway to his. Jefferson Blake. The billionaire whose building this was. The man she had spent 5 minutes insulting to a maintenance worker who had been. Oh no. Her eyes widened as the pieces fell into place. The coveralls. The way he had really looked at her art. The questions that had seemed too perceptive for casual interest. "Jeff," she whispered. "Guilty," he said with a slight smile. "May we speak privately?" Ramona's cheeks burned with humiliation, but she nodded. He guided her through the crowd to a quiet alcove near the windows. The moment they were alone, words tumbled out of her. "You lied to me. You let me stand there and insult you to your face." "I didn't lie," Jefferson said calmly. "I just didn't correct your assumptions. And frankly, I wanted to hear what you really thought without the filter people usually apply around me. So this is what, some kind of game?" Ramona gestured at the exhibition space. "You felt bad for the poor, angry artist and decided to throw her some charity? Or maybe you got off on the irony of helping someone who hates everything you stand for?" Jefferson's expression hardened slightly. "I arranged opportunities for you because your work deserves to be seen. The Bayside Center approached me for funding recommendations, and I suggested they look at your portfolio. Mrs. Hammond is a legitimate collector I introduced to your work. This gala invitation came from the organizing committee after I mentioned your name." "You mentioned my name," Ramona repeated flatly. "How generous." The billionaire notices the peasant and changes her life with a snap of his fingers. That's not fair. Isn't it? Ramona felt 3 weeks of confusion and suspicion crystallize into anger. You have so much power that you can remake someone's career on a whim, and you don't see how that's exactly what I was talking about in that elevator? You think you're helping, but really you're just proving that success in this city depends on catching the attention of people like you. Jefferson was quiet for a moment, his jaw working. When he spoke, his voice was measured but tight. You're right that I have advantages, resources, power that isn't equally distributed. I've never denied that. But I built this company from nothing, Ramona. I was a college dropout eating ramen and sleeping on friends' couches while I wrote code for 18 hours a day. I know what struggle looks like. Do you? Ramona challenged. Because from where I'm standing, you knew it for maybe 2 years before you struck gold. I've been struggling for a decade. So have millions of other people who work just as hard as you did but never get that lucky break. So I should apologize for succeeding? Feel guilty for creating something valuable? No, Ramona said, surprised by her own answer. But you should acknowledge that luck played a role. That timing mattered. That being a man in tech opened doors that wouldn't have opened for someone like me. And maybe, just maybe, you should use that wealth to change the systems that make it so hard for everyone else instead of just picking a random artist to patronize. Jefferson stepped closer, and Ramona realized he was genuinely engaged now, not defensive but interested. Then tell me how. I've set up scholarships, funded community programs, invested in affordable housing initiatives. I employ 3,000 people at fair wages with good benefits. What am I missing? The question caught her off guard. She had expected dismissal or platitudes, not genuine inquiry. You really want to know? I wouldn't ask if I didn't. Ramona looked past him at the gala, at the wealth and privilege on casual display. Then she looked back at Jefferson Blake, at the man who had listened to her art commentary in an elevator while wearing coveralls, and made a decision. The Bayside Community Arts Center that you funded? It's in a neighborhood being gentrified by companies like yours. Artists move there because it's affordable, create a vibrant culture, and then get priced out when developers notice. Your affordable housing initiatives probably require income levels that exclude the people who need help most. And your 3,000 employees? How many are contract workers without benefits? How many are in the service roles that keep your offices running but barely make enough to live in this city? Jefferson's expression was unreadable. Ramona braced herself for anger, but instead, he nodded slowly. Those are fair points. Some I've considered, some I haven't. So what now? Ramona asked, suddenly exhausted. You uninvite me from your gala? Rescind the opportunities you dangled? Now, Jefferson said, you tell me what you want. Not what you think I want to hear, not what will keep the opportunities flowing. What do you actually want, Ramona Pierce? She met his eyes, those sharp blue eyes that had looked at her work with genuine appreciation even when she was insulting him. I want my art to matter on its own merit, not because a billionaire patron decided to notice me. I want to create work that tells true stories about real people without compromising my vision for commercial appeal. And I want to stop feeling like I have to choose between my principles and paying rent. What if those things aren't mutually exclusive? Jefferson asked. In my experience, they always are. Then maybe, he said quietly, your experience needs to expand. And maybe mine does too. Before Ramona could respond, a woman in a burgundy gown approached. Jefferson, the auction is about to start. They need you for the opening remarks. Thank you, Caroline. I'll be right there. He turned back to Ramona. Stay. Please. We're not finished with this conversation. I don't know if there's anything left to say. There's everything left to say, Jefferson replied. But first, I need to go make rich people feel good about donating money. One of the job requirements. Despite herself, Ramona felt a smile tug at her lips. That was almost self-aware. I have my moments. He started to leave, then paused. For what it's worth, I'm sorry I didn't tell you who I was in the elevator. You're right that it was manipulative, even if my intentions were good. But I'm not sorry I helped you, and I won't apologize for thinking your work deserves recognition. He walked away before she could formulate a response. Ramona stood by the window, watching his reflection as he moved through the crowd. People gravitated toward him, their body language shifting into deference. He handled it smoothly, but she noticed something she hadn't before, a slight tension in his shoulders, a practiced quality to his smile. Maybe Jefferson Blake wasn't as comfortable in this world as she had assumed. Maybe having everything came with its own kind of cage. Liz appeared at her elbow with 2 fresh glasses of champagne. Okay, I saw you talking to Jefferson Blake. Tell me everything, and don't leave out a single detail. Ramona accepted the champagne, her mind still processing the encounter. It's complicated. The best things always are. As the auction began and Jefferson took the stage to welcoming applause, Ramona found herself studying him with new eyes. Not as a symbol of everything wrong with wealth inequality, but as a person. Flawed, privileged, powerful, yes. But also curious, willing to listen, and more self-aware than she had given him credit for. She thought about his question, what did she actually want? And underneath her immediate answer, she felt something else stirring. A reluctant recognition that he had challenged her assumptions as much as she had challenged his. The evening was far from over. Neither was their conversation. And Ramona suspected that whatever happened next would force both of them to examine beliefs they had held as absolute truths. The uncomfortable thing about having your worldview challenged, she realized, was that it required admitting you might not have all the answers. But the potentially wonderful thing was what might be learned in the process. She raised her glass in a silent toast to Jefferson on the stage, acknowledging the truths neither of them had explicitly declared but both seemed to understand. The real conversation, the honest one, would come later. 2 days after the gala, Ramona received a handwritten note delivered to her studio by courier. The stationery was expensive but understated, and the message was simple. Coffee? I promised to wear normal clothes this time. There's a project I'd like to discuss. No obligations, no strings. Just a conversation between 2 people who might have more to learn from each other. An address and time were listed below, along with a phone number if she needed to reschedule. It was signed simply, Jefferson. Ramona stared at the note for 20 minutes before texting Liz, who responded with a string of exclamation points and fire emojis. Against her better judgment, and admittedly curious, Ramona showed up at the address the next morning. It wasn't a coffee shop but a community garden in the Western Addition, tucked between apartment buildings. Jefferson was already there, wearing jeans and a simple button-down shirt, sitting on a bench next to an elderly man who appeared to be showing him photos on a phone. Mr. Washington was just telling me about his grandson's graduation, Jefferson said as Ramona approached. Computer engineering at Stanford. Full scholarship, Mr. Washington added proudly. First in our family to finish college. They chatted for a few more minutes before Mr. Washington excused himself to tend his tomato plants. Jefferson stood, gesturing toward a walking path that wound through the garden. Thank you for coming, he said. I wasn't sure you would. I wasn't sure I would either, Ramona admitted. But I'm curious about this mysterious project. Before we get to that, I owe you an apology. A real one. Jefferson stopped walking, facing her directly. I spent the last 2 days reading everything I could find about the artists and workers you mentioned at the gala. The gentrification patterns, the contractor employment practices, the actual income requirements for affordable housing programs. You were right about almost everything. Ramona blinked, surprised. Almost? You were wrong about one thing. You said I struck gold after 2 years of struggling. It was actually 5 years before I had my first profitable quarter, and another 3 before I could pay myself a living wage. But that's a minor point. He resumed walking. The larger truth is that I've been insulated from the consequences of my success. I see the jobs created and the tax revenue generated. I don't see the families displaced or the artists priced out. So what changed? Ramona asked, walking beside him. Why do you suddenly care what I think? Jefferson considered the question carefully. Meeting you in that elevator reminded me of something I'd forgotten. Before I was Jefferson Blake, tech billionaire, I was Jeff, the kid whose single mom worked 3 jobs to keep us housed. When she got sick and couldn't work, we lost our apartment. We lived in our car for 4 months. Ramona stopped walking. I didn't know that. Most people don't. It's not in my official biography. His voice was matter-of-fact, but she heard the old pain underneath. My mom recovered, found work, and we got back on our feet. But I remember what instability feels like. I remember the shame of using food stamps and the fear of every unexpected expense. Somewhere along the way, I convinced myself that my success meant I'd transcended those experiences. That I'd earned my way out and anyone else could too if they just worked hard enough. That's a comforting narrative, Ramona said softly. It's also incomplete, Jefferson replied. I had advantages. A teacher who recognized my aptitude for coding and spent her lunch periods tutoring me. A friend whose family let me crash on their couch. The timing of the tech boom. And yes, being a man in an industry that favors men. You forced me to look at those advantages honestly. They reached a section of the garden where children's art decorated a fence, bright paintings of flowers and sunshine. Ramona touched one gently, feeling the texture of the acrylic paint. So this project, she said. What is it? I want to create something different, Jefferson said. Not charity, not patronage. A genuine community initiative that addresses some of what you talked about. But I can't do it alone, and I can't do it from my perspective only. I need people who understand the problems from the ground level. And you want me involved? I want you to lead it. Jefferson pulled out a folder from a bag she hadn't noticed he was carrying. This is preliminary. Just ideas. But the core concept is creating affordable live-work spaces for artists and community members, coupled with galleries and performance spaces that prioritize local voices. Not as a profit center, but as an investment in the cultural ecosystem. Ramona opened the folder, scanning the documents inside. Her hands trembled slightly as she saw the scope: a converted warehouse in the Mission, 20 units with built-in studio space, rents capped at 20% of area median income. Gallery space operated as a collective. Programming designed by and for the community. This is ambitious, she said. It's also complicated and probably filled with blind spots I haven't recognized yet, Jefferson replied. That's why I need your honesty. Your willingness to tell me when I'm wrong. Your understanding of what the community actually needs instead of what I think they need. Ramona closed the folder, looking at him carefully. Why me? You could hire consultants, community organizers, people with actual experience in this kind of work. Because you're not afraid to call me out, Jefferson said simply. And because when you showed me your art in that elevator, I saw someone who genuinely sees and values people others overlook. That perspective is worth more than any consultant's report. She wanted to dismiss it as flattery, but the sincerity in his voice stopped her. I'd want full creative control over the programming and tenant selection. Agreed. And I'd want to expand it. Not just artists, but teachers, social workers, nurses. The people who make this city function but can't afford to live here anymore. I like that, Jefferson said, his eyes brightening. What else? A pipeline program for kids in underserved schools. Art education, yes, but also coding, business skills, whatever helps them build futures. And it needs to be free, with supplies and equipment provided. Done. What else? Ramona felt momentum building, ideas flowing faster than she could articulate them. Job training and placement services. Mental health resources. Community meals. A structure where residents contribute based on their skills and abilities, creating interdependence instead of dependence. Jefferson was nodding, actually taking notes on his phone. This is exactly the kind of thinking I needed. You're seeing the whole ecosystem, not just the housing component. Because housing alone doesn't solve poverty, Ramona said. You need community, opportunity, dignity. All of it together. They walked in silence for a moment, both processing the scope of what they were discussing. Finally, Ramona voiced the question that had been nagging at her. What do you get out of this? And don't say satisfaction or giving back. There's got to be something else. Jefferson stopped at a bench, sitting down and gesturing for her to join him. Honestly? I want to feel connected to something real again. I have more money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes, but I can't remember the last time I had a conversation that mattered. The last time someone saw me as a person instead of an opportunity or an obstacle. That sounds lonely, Ramona said, surprising herself with the empathy in her voice. It is, he admitted. Profoundly. And that day in the elevator, when you treated me like just another person working in the building, told me exactly what you thought without calculation or agenda, it felt like oxygen after years of breathing filtered air. Ramona understood, though it complicated her anger at him. So we're both looking for something authentic in a city of performance. Maybe that's the real project, Jefferson said. Not just the buildings or programs, but proving that people from different worlds can actually bridge the gap. That wealth doesn't have to create permanent separation. It won't be easy, Ramona warned. I'm going to push back against your assumptions constantly. I'm going to fight for things you think are impractical. And I'm going to hold you accountable when your privilege shows. Good, Jefferson said. I'm counting on it. And I'm going to challenge you too. About sustainability, scalability, unintended consequences. We'll probably fight. Probably, Ramona agreed, feeling a smile break through despite her reservations. But if we do this right, Jefferson continued, we create something that outlasts both of us. Something that changes the model for how wealth and community can interact. Not charity flowing down, but genuine partnership. Ramona looked around the community garden, at Mr. Washington tending his tomatoes, at the children's art on the fence, at the mix of residents who had created something beautiful in the middle of the city's chaos. This was what she wanted to replicate and protect. I have conditions, she said finally. I expected nothing less. We set up an independent board with community representation that has real decision-making power. You can't swoop in and override choices when you disagree. We document everything, create a model that other people can replicate. And we commit to transparency about both successes and failures. Jefferson extended his hand. I can work with that. Partners? Ramona looked at his hand for a long moment, thinking about everything that had brought them to this point. The elevator encounter, the gala confrontation, and now this unlikely alliance. She was probably making a mistake. This could blow up spectacularly. But the alternative was retreating to familiar cynicism and letting the opportunity pass. She shook his hand. Partners. But I'm keeping my day job until this proves viable. Smart, Jefferson said with a genuine laugh. See, you're already the practical one in this relationship. Over the following months, Ramona and Jefferson worked together in ways neither had anticipated. She introduced him to community organizers, artists, and workers who shared their experiences and needs without filtering them for a billionaire audience. He taught her about zoning laws, construction logistics, and the complex negotiation required to make ambitious projects happen. They fought, often and intensely. About aesthetics, about priorities, about the balance between idealism and pragmatism. But they learned to argue productively, each respecting the other's perspective enough to genuinely consider it. The warehouse project broke ground on a cool October morning. Ramona stood next to Jefferson as community members, future residents, and local officials gathered for the ceremony. Mr. Washington from the garden was there, as was Liz, who had been recruited to handle communications for the project. "Ready?" Jefferson asked quietly. Terrified, Ramona admitted. "What if we're wrong? What if this becomes another gentrification story? Then we acknowledge it, learn from it, and do better," Jefferson said. "That's the promise, remember? Not perfection, but honest effort and willingness to course correct." As they stepped forward to speak to the crowd, Ramona caught Jefferson's eye and saw something that hadn't been there during their first elevator encounter: genuine partnership, built on mutual challenge and respect. She thought about her angry speech that day, about how she had dismissed him as just another billionaire, blind to his own privilege. She hadn't been entirely wrong, but she hadn't been entirely right either. People were more complex than their bank accounts, more dimensional than their societal positions. Jefferson Blake was still privileged, still wielded enormous power, and still had blind spots that needed constant addressing. But he was also willing to listen, willing to change, and willing to share power in ways that mattered. And Ramona Pierce was still angry about inequality, still passionate about giving voice to overlooked people, and still willing to speak uncomfortable truths. But she had learned that anger alone couldn't build solutions. Sometimes you had to work with people you disagreed with, finding common ground without compromising core values. As she began to speak about the project's vision, addressing the gathered community with Jefferson beside her, Ramona realized this was her real art. Not just paintings on walls, but helping to create structures that let people paint their own futures. The elevator encounter had been a collision of worldviews. What followed was the harder, more important work of building something together. Not despite their differences, but because of them. In a city increasingly divided by wealth, they were proving that bridges could still be built. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. The project would face challenges, setbacks, and criticisms. But standing there with community members who had been part of every decision, with a partner who had proven willing to be transformed by the process, Ramona felt something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. Real, earned, grounded in action rather than wishful thinking. Jefferson caught her eye as she finished speaking, and his slight nod conveyed understanding. They had started as adversaries divided by circumstance and assumption. They had become partners united by shared purpose. The applause washed over them as the crowd responded to their vision. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new conflicts to navigate, new assumptions to examine. But today, in this moment, they had proven that honest encounter, even when it started with insults in an elevator, could lead somewhere meaningful. The city sparkled around them, still unequal, still struggling, but also still full of people willing to build something better. Together.